I'm going to say very few words, but the thing I'd like to just underscore is it's unfortunate that the room thinned out a little because we actually have somebody here who's got a real budget, somewhere around $3 billion. So, 3 billion euros. Let me correct that. So we should hear a giant sucking sound, and it should be going in the direction of Babs Rangaiah. I just want to, we're going to ring fence him, but he's got real money, so he's the guy. In the spirit of time, and it's the end of the day, so I probably will cut short what I was going to talk about, but I think that it's fair to say there were a couple of statistics that I came across recently in preparation for today. And one that caught my eye was a statement the other day that said, in fact, Facebook and MySpace, both in the range of 120 to 130 million users, actually are twice the size of the country of France. I found that to be an interesting statistic as we talk about social media and its applicability for brands and how we're going to deal with it. And interestingly enough, I just finished a book that was recommended to me, and I highly recommend it. It's called Here Comes Everybody by Clay Sharkey. And he made a very interesting point, which I think will set us up pretty well. And his point was that we are all media outlets. Every one of us is able to be a broadcaster, either by generating our own content or by repeating content from others. This fundamentally changes the needs of the advertiser and marketer. I mean, in a sense, how can you possibly buy space on 1.3 billion media outlets, which is a rough number on those that are online? With that as a backdrop, I think it's, as Spencer said, a good opportunity to have Travis and Babs representing sort of both sides of the equation. Babs has recently taken on a new global title at Uniliver as Chief of Global Communications Planning. And Babs, better known in the marketplace as the Babinator, is somebody that I think is worthy of listening to. And Travis, obviously, running the international MySpace business, has got some unique perspectives. So with that, I'm going to sort of join the guys and tee it up. So sort of setting the table, I wonder if you could do me a favor, Travis, and the audience a favor, and sort of set us up as to a quick explanation of social media as we're utilizing that term here today.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of definitions of what social media is, but I think ultimately what a social media site is, a social network in particular, is a completely new kind of tool that changes the way people are interacting with each other, whether it's their friends, whether it's people they don't know, whether it's with bands, whether it's with brands. And it's actually been a pretty revolutionary thing. I think it's been one of the most transformational occurrences in the new media space in probably the last decade. It's something that's completely transforming the map, and I think something everyone should be paying attention to.
So with that as a backdrop, Babs, I would say to you, in the sort of turbulent times we're facing on a global basis, is it a good idea to be taking those dollars from the tried and true arena and putting them into the more emerging space?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
I hope so. If not, you wouldn't have a job. I mean,
well, I do all media.
You could do old media.
No, I definitely think we do. I think, marketers follow eyeballs. Eyeballs are behind the kind of more emerging space, and it's more measurable. I mean, there's many reasons, the word of mouth that it creates, all the different things that we've done. We've seen great results from the campaigns that we've centered in the more emerging spaces, whether it's entertainment or digital or social. And we'll continue to do that. So I don't, if we cut budgets, we cut budgets, but we'll continue to focus on the place that we think is the most important place to reach our consumers.
And in the sort of emerging space, do you look at social media as an important part of that mix when you're sitting and doing that channel planning?
Yeah, I mean, see, the problem with it is there's a couple of things going on. There's social media, there's mobile, there's gaming, there's music. There's all these new opportunities for us to market, moving out of the traditional kind of television and print basic 30-second ads. But we're having trouble trying to figure out how to use those places because there isn't kind of set standards, and also because So there's two issues. One of which is our guys, our teams tend to be older. They're not natives to the digital space, so it's kind of harder to market in an area that you're not as familiar with. So we do some things to really push, living the space, getting pages on Facebook, doing things even if it's not your natural thing to do. And then the other thing is to just figure out a creative way to use these channels, because right now, we're doing the same thing. We're putting banner ads on social media sites, and it's probably not the best way to go. And I tell a great story. I love this story. To most of the teams is, in order to look forward, you look back. There's a great story about radio and the way that it launched in the U.S. In the 20s. And, radio was this big, giant box, and all it did was broadcast news. And there was a guy named David Sarnoff, who I heard someone refer to earlier, who had this big idea to run the heavyweight fight on the radio at the time. It was the Jack Dempsey fight, which at the time in the U.S. was like the equivalent of the Super Bowl. And all the management's, no one's going to want to listen to a fight. The whole thing about a fight, you want to see the blood, you want to see the action. And he pushed it. He was persistent. He said, I think that this would be something that would be interesting, and radio sales were very low at the time. And of course, a week before the fight, radio sales started trickling up because people heard about this. And then the week after the fight, radio sales went up something like 4,000% in the next few months. And then it became the broadcast medium of its time until television 30 years later. And the reason I tell that story is because he was able to see radio as something other than what it was. It wasn't just this box that could run news when people were getting newspapers already. He saw it as something bigger and something in a creative way. He saw a different way to use it. And we have to do that with social media, and we have to do that with mobile and with music and all the opportunities that exist now. We can't just use the existing models and try to just transfer them over. We have to use them for what they are. And there's so many things, you heard the numbers on MySpace and Facebook. They're gigantic. And mobile, 3.5 billion people have mobile phones, half the population. And, we just see it as a phone, so.
Yeah, I think it's a great analogy, the radio analogy. And I think the one difference is that social media things, sites like MySpace, aren't just the box and the idea now. They've actually become these massive, very mainstream tools. MySpace alone has, like you said, 120 million active users who are on the site. They're spending an average of 160 minutes per month each on the site. So 19.6 billion minutes of your customers' time are being spent on these sites today worldwide. It's really staggering. And I think for advertisers and for brands, you can't not be there and can't not be part of this dialogue and discussion that's going on. I think the worst thing that a brand can do is to ignore what's happening. This really has become a mainstream part of the way people of all ages are really interacting. And getting on there and finding ways to engage with your customers, engage with your users in new ways.
So, Travis, could you help me? I want to go back to what I said I didn't need to do at the beginning, which is, sort of set the table on social media. But I think it's important, certainly it should be for you, to give us a quick distinction from a perspective that you have between MySpace, Facebook, Bebo. How do you differentiate yourself and, as opposed to being in that bucket of, oh, this is social media?
Yeah, well, I think, and Richard Cooperstein's here, he may have a different opinion on it, but I think overall there are some common underlying themes across all things that are called social networks. I mean, all of them allow you to sign up, to create a profile. They have some basic messaging tools, and I think those pieces are fairly similar. I think beyond that, though, MySpace we see ourselves as a very, very different kind of product in that our site goes much beyond sort of the basic communication. Unlike any other social network out there, beyond the communication, we've always been about things like self-expression. We've always enabled users to create a profile that really is their home on their internet. They can customize it completely, different colors, backgrounds, add music, add slideshows and photos, in a way that it really reflects who they are in the offline world, in the same way, your living room or, your teenage daughter's locker and reflects who they are in the offline world. That self-expression is important to who we are as a brand and important to what people do. They really are spending more time sort of lingering on the site, not just going on, sending a few messages and jumping off. On top of that self-expression layer, we've built a whole range of things called, things around content and culture. So music is huge. MySpace is the most visited music site on the internet today. There are more than 5 million active bands on MySpace interacting with their fans. We've added comedy, we've added film, we've added video. And this richness has really created a great place for people, again, not just to send messages, but to actually spend time and interact. Along with that, we really always thought about how do we take this concept of social media and connect it with advertising. So from day one, we knew at MySpace we wanted to be an advertising-driven site. And we actually built advertising units into every page of the site, even before we had advertisers, because we wanted our users to get used to the idea that there were going to be brands on the site, and that's part of the contract they were signing up for. And we have, over the last 5 years, since we started off, spent a lot of effort and time working with brands and working with agencies about how do you refine that model, how do you actually create an interesting dialogue between users and brands, and we're actually quite good at it. And I think as a result, we've seen that our leadership in terms of the monetization of the social web, the monetization of social media, is sort of unrivaled. We recently overtook Yahoo in the US as the #1 provider of display advertising in July. That is a huge accomplishment for a site that's only been around 5 years. There was some stats that came out from eMarketer that basically said that MySpace is capturing today about 55% of ad revenue spent in the social media space today. The next closest rival is capturing about 20%. It's not by accident, it's because it's something that we've really focused on, I think we're quite good at.
So let me take that back to the portion about sitting with the advertisers and the agencies. Either categorically or specifically, your choice, who's done it well? I mean, can you point to some good examples of either brands or categories that have found a successful
Yeah,
approach?
I think Esther Dyson this morning made a great comment about how, in this space, advertisers actually need to get out there and engage their customers. You can't just sort of show up there. You have to actually try to engage people. I mean, the best example, probably most recently, is frankly Barack Obama, who, as everyone knows, there's quite a big media story about how Barack Obama was leveraging new media to actually drive a pretty historic election in a lot of ways. There's this, in one way it was historic because it was the first MySpace user to ever get elected president. That's a pretty good statement. He created a profile. He actually created an ecosystem of sites, of which his MySpace profile was one, and was very smart about not just putting content up there, but actually trying to go out and engage, people who are passionate about them, and get them to go and take his message out to their friends, creating banners and badges they could put on their MySpace profiles, videos they could install. And he ended up getting, on his MySpace profile, he has about 970 million friends, or 970,000 friends. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than Madonna. It's not quite as big as Tila Tequila, but it's pretty big. In terms of
something to aspire to.
He's working on it. Probably needs to show a bit more skin, I think, actually. But another great example, I think, is Intel. So we did a really interesting campaign with Intel in Europe, and this was a 6-country campaign that they ran, 6 languages on MySpace. And they basically, again, they wanted to figure out how do we connect, Intel, which is a semiconductor company, with our consumers in a way that's emotional. And they thought, okay, music is the next thing. We want to be seen as the brand that powers your music. So we came up with a very musicians. And so they created a competition for musicians. So musicians on MySpace can have 4 tracks on their MySpace profile. We started a thing where any musician who went to the Intel profile and added it as a friend, and their top 8 friends, could actually get a 5th track on their profile. Word like this spread like wildfire through the music community. So every band in the world was going to the Intel profile and adding it on there. They then created a competition, a pan-European competition, to create the Intel supergroup, and basically told all the musicians, okay, we're going to create a supergroup. We're going to have a song recorded with Universal Music. You got to go out and get your fans to come to our profile and vote for you. So then you had all these bands going out and going to all their fans and saying, I'm, Jimmy, who's the drummer, is up for this Intel supergroup. Go and vote for him. They ended up getting an enormous response. They actually had about 600,000 profile views on an Intel chip page. I mean, that's pretty astounding. And sorry, not 600,000, it's 6 million profile views on an Intel profile. It's pretty astounding. Barack Obama has had about 9 million. So you think Barack Obama, 9 million page views. Intel, 6 million. It's a semiconductor company. It's that kind of campaign where you're actually going out and engaging the audience proactively that can really make a difference.
So Go ahead, Abs.
No, I was going to say, so I have a couple of examples, one of which is, we've used social media in some pretty interesting ways. And I see my friend Dina Kaplan there. We, at one of these, you were making a joke about having a client here. And I kind of like being one of the few clients because you kind of I feel like you get an advantage when you're in places like this. And I met Dina once at a conference similar where there was no clients. It was a video on the net conference. And she runs, or one of the founders of Blip TV. And we did a deal with Amanda Congdon, who's a kind of a famous video blogger that I'm sure most clients probably wouldn't have known about at the time, where she actually created a wiki and created an ad for us on one of our campaigns and had like a bunch of people within her core database that helped create an ad. But a great example is actually, how many people here have ever heard of Julia Allison? Okay. Yeah, cover of Wired magazine. I mean, here's a woman with no talent, no resources, no money, no nothing to speak of, and she can go
Babs,
out.
don't hold back. Give us your real opinion.
I mean,
of
you've got
Julia,
Barack
please.
Obama can spend, he can use social media, but he's also got, a bunch of other stuff, and we have brands with a lot of money. But here's an example that just shows the power of tools for marketing for social media. She moves to New York with one very specific goal, which is to become a cult figure, and she blogs on Blogger and twits on Twitter and uses Tumblr for scrapbooking and posts pictures on Flickr. She does all these things using all the different social media applications out there, and all of a sudden, she becomes exactly what she wants to be. She creates all this buzz, gets all this PR, is on the cover of Wired, is a New York magazine, is covered by the Times, all of this stuff with nothing. And if you think about the power of that as a marketer, here's one, no brand, nothing, can do that. Like, what does that say for companies like ours? If we do it right, we should be able to, because we have the combination of money, supposedly marketing expertise, skills, and real brands. So, I mean, I think that just, to me, in a city like New York, for a person like that to get that kind of brand buzz over that kind of brand says a lot about what we should be able to do.
You're not going to start singing New York, New York now, are you? You're not going to do that.
I don't miss it that much.
Well, there you go. But
That's our closing number.
that's right. We're saving that for our boys band. So let's talk about the audience. So social media, as I think we know, but there's confusion around it, is not for kids. I can say it anecdotally. I shared the story with the two of you about a legitimate billion-dollar-plus advertiser who reached out to me for a reason that turned into a significant piece of business. This is somebody who had my email, my phone, my cell. It could reach me 15 different ways and chose to reach me via a social network in a legitimate business context. So, clear example of somebody not within the primary demo that is utilizing social media. But we do believe, at least from a marketing standpoint, that this tends to skew young. As we had this discussion in preparation, Travis, you had an interesting statistic in terms of the age group. So if you could...
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a misconception that this is a teenage phenomenon. It's not. And when you actually look at something as big as MySpace, we have 42% reach of internet users in the US. It's very mainstream. If you look at the ComScore stats, we're actually 85% of our total audience is over the age of 18, and 2/3 of the MySpace audience is over the age of 25.
How far over the age of 25, though?
It goes up to, it's actually funny if you go and look at browse people, you can go on there and browse by age and look for, women in their 60s. What you actually find is it's a mix of, you'll have some sort of teenagers.
Those women are actually in their 70s, but they're
lying on. No, but
60 on MySpace.
there are actually a lot of women in their 60s on MySpace who are using a MySpace profile, which I found that quite astounding.
Well, they connect with their grandkids.
Yeah, they're connecting with their grandkids, and it's become a really easy way to interact. If you go to a place like Brazil, where Orkut is very dominant, you can't find anyone of any age in Brazil who doesn't use Orkut. It really is astonishing.
So if that's the case, Babs, when you are sitting with your agencies and your internal groups and you are doing a media plan, still done the old-fashioned way, the components of it may be different, but is social media hitting every one of the plans for the myriad of brands, in general?
I think in some capacity. We're still probably not spending as much money in the digital space as we should. And while media planning is still kind of a fundamental approach. I think our bigger interest now is what we call really getting into people's culture, penetrating their culture, because it's not about interrupting people anymore. We know that we don't have the same impact with that, and we've gotten results from really getting into people's kind of into their lives and what they're doing, because today we expect them to pull and to be engaged with our communication. So, I mean, we definitely use it. We had, you know, Ben & Jerry's created a campaign where we actually had our consumers create our next flavor. We've had, you know, we've had consumer-generated campaigns, and we've used news feeds from Facebook where people actually get news feeds about the brand for something that they're interested in. When we had people create videos for us, you know, and we use incredible targeting with MySpace. When we had a campaign for Sunsilk that had Shakira and Madonna in the ad, you could actually target all the people that put Madonna or Shakira as their favorite artists. So, I mean, obviously they'd be more inclined to want to see your ad if their favorite artist is Madonna and she's in the ad. So, yeah, I mean, we've definitely used it. We probably should be using it more.
So Babs, you talked about consumers, you know, creating the messaging or the flavor. You know, Unilever spent a lot of money 2 years ago buying an Academy Awards commercial, as I recall, with user-generated commercial messaging as the centerpiece for Dove. It was for Dove, I think.
Yeah, Primo.
And so my question is, do you think that's a reality? Do you think that's a fad? Do you think that's...
I think that consumer-generated content is absolutely a reality. It's definitely not a fad. I mean, the fact that historically Hollywood has controlled all content creation and distribution, and now people can do both, and they can reach tons of people, as we've seen by blogs and the way videos have exploded. I mean, it's basic human need to want to express themselves, and it's a basic human want to become famous. I mean, it's clear by all the stuff that's happening. So that's definitely not a fad. I mean, that was one of our most successful campaigns. We held a consumer-generated contest where we actually asked consumers to create our next ad for this big launch for Dove. But we didn't just ask them to create it because we knew, you know, how many people are really just going to create an ad. So we have to use our marketing, blocking and tackling, you know, amplifying it, using different channels to drive people to create it. And we had the winning ad was placed on the Academy Awards, so it became like content, because now everybody wants to see, I wonder which ad won. And talk about penetrating the culture. The day after the Academy Awards, when they said, you know, when the Associated Press issues that press release that reaches billions of people around the world that says Best Director, Best Actor, in it, they actually said, and the winner of the Dove Cream Oil contest was Lindsay Miller from Sherman Oaks, California. So clearly that resonated because you got the Associated Press releasing. So you're using a combination of social media, the digital space, consumer-generated content, and television in the form that we think it will, you know, in the way that it'll survive, which is there's only a few events that still generate that kind of mass and that kind of interest, and, you know, no time shifting, no place shifting, because people want to know the next day, so they're not as likely to watch it a week later.
So, Travis, Babs, from the Unilever perspective, last year Unilever was named Digital Market of the Year by Ad Age in the U.S. And unfortunately, they kept putting Babs' picture on the front page, and it was really getting annoying to open up Ad Age every day and see his picture. But that being said, and we talked about others that have done a good job, but Unilever's the second largest spender on the planet. Are you finding that same energy from other large brands, whether it's consumer brands or, you know, other verticals? I'm not now asking you who's doing it right. I'm asking you, are you finding that acceptance at that sort of a level?
Yeah, I think we've really seen a shift over the last 6 months, well, last year or so, where I think sites like MySpace have really moved from being in what was, I think, kind of considered a experimental category to really becoming a mainstream category, where we're in there competing against the big portals for big media spends online. And I think this is pretty much across the board. People are really starting to come on board in a big way. And I think, you know, the kinds of things Babs talked about, you know, everyone from the automakers to
not so much.
Not anymore.
No,
now they need to.
They still need to, and they still are, actually. McDonald's.
Are you getting cash in front?
Stuff.
No,
What's that?
I just want to make sure you're getting cash in front.
They're paying in cars, actually. No, a lot of people are coming on, and I think one of the things that's really helped that, besides just the overall scale, is some of the technology stuff. I mean, Babs mentioned the targeting stuff, and I think this is actually where things start to get really exciting. We launched a product about a year ago called MySpace Hyper Targeting, And really what this product does, it really brings alive the promise of what social networks were always meant to be from an advertising perspective, which is the idea that you have all these people on there and you know a tremendous amount about them from what they're saying, who they say they are, what they say they like. We've built a product that basically is a set of algorithms, smart algorithms, that basically crawls through all this information on the site and buckets people into interest categories. So we know people who are, who love Shakira. We know people who love jogging. We know people who love sports cars. Pretty much any category you want, we can target the right ad to those people. And we've seen tremendous lift in terms of click-through rates on those kind of things, between 100 and 300% versus demographic targeting, which is sort of the standard that everyone grew up on. You can do much better than demographic targeting, and what we've seen as we've rolled this out is it really starts to get the gears moving in advertisers' mind, because you actually realize, wait, we don't need to, why should we be targeting women 18 to 24? Aren't there some 25-year-olds who might be interested, and what about 26-year-olds? And maybe there's some people in their 50s that might want to. There's a lot of different ways of cutting it, and as we've started to roll this product out, it's really unlocking a lot of value. And I think this is really the future where we see this stuff going.
So you talked about demographically. Let's talk about geographically for a moment. So, separate myth from reality. There's a belief that the U.S. is trailing Europe and Asia in certain categories, technologically speaking. I guess it's fair to say that would be on the mobile platforms, but how are you finding that from an international perspective? Babs, you've now moved to an international role, and obviously Travis, you're in an international role. Are you finding the same level of interest from your side first, and then Babs, from yours, both within Unilever and as well as what you hear on the outside?
That's part of my job in moving to this role was to kind of transition some of what we've done in the U.S. to a more global role, to really get kind of more emphasis on the emerging space. I wouldn't say that I think the U.S. is still ahead of the vast majority of countries as it relates to broadband, speed of broadband, number of users on the internet. I mean, there's still very few that are in the same category, especially with the numbers. There may be raw numbers because of the populations of India and China, but the U.S. is still kind of in the lead. As it relates to mobile, you're right. I heard I was at a mobile thing the other day. This is an unbelievable story. In Western Europe, they did a study that shows that tweens, people in their age from 12 to 15 or something, now ring doorbells with their thumbs, whereas instead of their forefingers, because they're using their thumbs at such a rapid rate.
I'm going to keep it clean. I won't comment on that. Okay.
So I mean, that's an extraordinary stat if you think it's changing the entire, muscle memory of your hands because of the amount that they're text messaging to walk around, ringing doorbells with your thumb. So the mobile situation is definitely. I mean, the U.S. is actually getting there too, because how many people really don't have a cell phone in the U.S. and with kind of 3G and the iPhone, I think you'll see more and more people accessing the web. So I do think that, but I think for the most part, countries are all picking up, and they'll probably leapfrog some of the technologies that you've seen. But I wouldn't say that it's the U.S. is lagging in technology.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that you see a few markets that are really in leadership positions. And I think they're really sort of the U.S., Japan, the U.K., I think, are the markets that you see the most advanced behavior in terms of technology, in terms of marketing online. And I think after that, things step down. But it's changing really quickly. And I think what we're seeing is that
some Western, like the Nordic region has high.
The Nordic
numbers
regions,
but the population's small.
Nordic region's incredible. The UK actually has a higher percentage of total advertising spend happening online than the US does. And so do the Nordics, but then, almost 20% of total advertising is happening online in the UK. You go to a country like Spain.
Yeah, it's mostly Google.
Yeah, it's mostly Google. It's half Google.
And you're working off a smaller base.
Yeah, but you go to a country like
Listen,
Spain.
guys, you can talk amongst yourselves. It's great.
I think it's interesting that point gets made. I saw that stat, and I was like, there's Google's advertising spend specifically on search, and then there's the kind of advertising we're talking about, which is much less direct marketing focused.
Yeah, that's right. Google's about half. But if you look at a country like Spain, it's 4% of the total pie. They're several years behind in terms of, the digital online spend, but it's coming. I think it grew last year 35% year on year, so it's starting to happen. And I think what we'll see over time is, these trends do start spreading out and become global.
So before I turn it over to the audience, which I'll do in 2 seconds, I have one sort of final question from here, which is, as the consideration set for advertisers shrinks, and I think that happens as a result of the economic circumstances we're in, will you project the kind of growth you're going to see on your digital spend, Babs, percentage-wise? You know, it's going to grow, that's a certainty, but will it grow as fast as it might have, you know, from a different perspective?
Probably not in raw numbers, but definitely in percentage. Because we're going to spend less, but we spend, you know,
but that's the key. You're going to spend
a higher percentage,
right.
But we probably would have spent more raw money in the digital space, you know, if the economy, if what has happened didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, what we've been seeing, and it's obviously hard to, we don't have a crystal ball in terms of where things are going, but whenever there's a downturn, advertising budgets get cut back. I mean, that's just a fact of life. So far, what's been happening and what's been interesting is that even though advertising dollars are being cut back and a lot of people are you know, on the publishing side are taking a hit, so far the digital space has been relatively insulated, and we've seen a lot of money shifting from TV and traditional media to online. And I think the reason that's happening is just because it's much easier to demonstrate an ROI in a digital environment where you do have something you can measure concretely, and you can sort of say, I know I'm getting some value for my money, where it's a lot harder to gauge that in something like a television environment. I also think that media in the online space is relatively cheaper than it is.
You could also turn up more money in television. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're already spending 80–90% of your money there, and you need to make a real cut, cutting $200,000 from your digital space is not going to make an impact. So it actually works out. It works out better for the digital industry because there wasn't that much money there to begin with. So if you're going to make a real cut, you're going to cut it from where you have it.
So let's turn it over to the audience. I see Jack Myers with a microphone. I think it's a
Thanks,
microphone
Michael.
in his hand. I'm not sure.
There hasn't been any mention of virtual worlds, and while the Second Life bubble has burst, certainly kids and teens are on Gaia, Club Penguin, Webkins, virtual Laguna Beach, virtual The Hills, and so on. What's your perspective on the future for advertisers in virtual worlds?
And I think the technology of virtual worlds will definitely be more prevalent on websites and on different ways that we use it. I think the idea that we're going to expand our advertising in those types of sites for adults right now is probably not likely. The Club Penguins, all those sites are unbelievable, and those people will eventually grow up, and that will become a huge area. And like I said, I think the technology is fascinating and will definitely be a bigger part. But I don't think that we're going to be doing a lot in virtual worlds anytime soon.
To go 3D in some context?
No, I don't think that's something we're looking at least in the near term. I mean, I think that the virtual world thing in Second Life was obviously, there was a lot of hype and actually not a lot of people there. And I think people talked a lot about, you do see, you know, things like World of Warcraft, which are still actually quite niche, but you go to a place like China, and there are literally millions of people playing World of Warcraft all the time, and it does make you scratch your head a little bit and think, you know, there is something there, and there is, you know, there probably is a way to work advertising in there yet. But I think for the most part, the amount of time you need to invest to really be present in a virtual world keeps it limited to a pretty small set of people.
I mean, I think we may see increases in gaming, broadly gaming. But like, you know, when we talk of World of Warcraft, I mean, there's definitely some gaming opportunities, but specifically in virtual worlds as a marketing platform, it's that particular piece is probably not that big.
Yes, Babs, just an estimate on your total digital spending. What percentage is spent in campaigns that are absolutely quantifiable? You know, you're measuring clicks and those are the results. And what are spent in more brand awareness or trying to move the needle in that way, which you may not be able to measure? And how do you, well, first off, what would you say the percentages, and then how do you make those decisions?
I would say that the vast majority of the percentage would go towards brand for brands like mine. I mean, you know, we make food and soap and shampoo. We're not, we monitor the clicks and obviously the number of, you know, people that view videos, and we track all that stuff, but all of it is towards proxies that get to sales. I mean, at the end of the day, we measure everything based on net sales at the end, And then we have proxy measurements like, brand attributes, increase in scores, and all that. So I would say the vast majority of it is brand related, but it's all measured as well in the way that you can measure on the digital space. So I don't know if that, we do very little kind of direct marketing to come back to tie into, we don't have those kind of products.
I think it's actually a great question. I was talking with Rupert Day from Group M about this at lunch today. And it's good to hear you say that, Babs, because I do think that there are a lot of people when they're marketing online who they're not actually as totally clear about what their objectives are. There's different kinds of objectives. You have brand plays where the idea is building brand awareness, and you don't actually care whether someone clicks on your ad or not. And you have complete direct response where it's all about click-throughs. There's a tendency in the digital space where everyone wants to measure everything on clicks, even if the campaign that they've designed, the creative that they're running, is not about encouraging clicks, it's about brand. I think it's very important to know what it is you're trying to accomplish and design your campaign and then try to find a way to measure it there. We have some incredible formats on MySpace. We have the ability to completely skin our homepage. You can take over for a product launch. Actually, Uniliver was the first one that ever did this when we launched this in Australia. You can put a rich media, high-definition trailer across the top and skin it with the brand. It's a beautiful format. It creates a ton of buzz, great for brand awareness. It's not about clicks. It's about visual impact. I think if more people were thinking the way Babs was.
We're really trying to get to, like I said before with the radio story, is more creative ways to use the space that's available today that isn't about banner ads, clicks, and so forth. I mean, we used a great, talking about mobile, this is classic. So, again, using it as something other than a phone and little messages on a tiny screen and, trying to telemarket, like none of that stuff is what we feel is the big idea. So for Lynx, which is in the US, it's called Axe, targets kind of young men, 18, kind of really 15, but core targets kind of 16, 17, 18 to 20 years old. And we have the campaign idea was this idea of weapons of mass seduction, because the whole thing about the brand is trying to reach girls, right? Or trying to help guys get girls. And we made it a weapon. So the not that, we made it a weapon that allows you to help get girls. So what it does is, we had an application that you get, so you can use it. Like if you're online at a bar and there's a bunch of girls in the bar and you want to impress them and there's a hot car in the front, you've got a button on it that goes beep, beep to make it look like it's your car. It's a Porsche or whatever, and like the lights are going off. And, it can play a harmonica, it plays kind of a wedding tune. So all these things. So it becomes something other than a phone. It becomes something other than a little link ad on a website that, who is ever, these are needles and haystacks. But all of a sudden you make it creative and you engage a consumer like that and it penetrates the culture and it gives a guy a reason to have that app, that becomes a campaign. And it just won actually the digital campaign of the year in the UK. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to get to. We're trying to get beyond kind of this, because otherwise then it's the same issue as having 30-second ads that get ignored. It's just another set of, pushing ads out that isn't the way that we want it. We want it to be entertaining, engaging, and something people want to take and talk about and play with and send around. And I even like social media. It's funny. We had a meeting with, pardon the competitor here, but we talked with Facebook. And they actually brought us in to show us that there was, because we penetrated the culture with campaigns for Dove and Axe, there was already hundreds and hundreds of groups created by consumers on those social networks about our brands. And those are created because separately we're creating campaigns that are interesting enough for them to engage with. So when you talk about when you're targeting people and you can target groups, 500, 600 groups, they're all around your brand, that's a way to leverage social media in a way that you might not have even thought until they shared with us. Like all these groups, all these people are spending all this time talking about the brands, Campaign for Real Beauty, and because they're both interesting things that consumers are, it's part of their culture.
So Babs, I just have to ask the final question. I need to know if this was purchased or for a swag, but I happen to notice a James Bond watch on here. That's right. I just want to know if this, have you totally gone over to the other side?
No, this is all part of, when I said living the space, I'm trying to push our teams to get Facebook pages, whatever, everything, this is the same thing. That's the hot movie right now, Quantum of Solace. I take off my nice watch and I put on my James Bond watch because that's what it's about. I'm living the space.
Gentlemen, speaking of living the space, we